A Werewolf Shifter Romance. Written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Hidden in Darkness. The stone floor beneath Vivienne's knees was cold and unforgiving, much like everything else in her life for the past 5 years. She knelt beside the ornate bed, scrubbing at a wine stain that Luna Seraphine had deliberately spilled hours earlier, her hands raw and aching from the day's endless tasks. The silver collar around her neck pulsed with a dull heat, a constant reminder of her position, her worthlessness, her cage. 24 years old, and Vivienne couldn't remember a time before this. Before the collar, before the abuse, before the hunger that gnawed at her insides with relentless teeth. Her memories simply stopped 5 years ago, as if someone had taken a blade and cut away everything that came before. She had no family that she could recall, no home beyond these castle walls, no identity beyond that of servant to the cruel woman who ruled as Luna beside the Alpha King. You missed a spot. Seraphine's voice was honey-sweet venom, the kind that burned going down. The Luna stood in the doorway, her platinum blonde hair cascading over her shoulders in perfect waves, her green eyes cold as winter frost. She was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, all sharp edges and deadly intent. Vivienne bowed her head lower, not trusting herself to speak. The collar tightened imperceptibly, a warning. Obey, submit, survive. I asked the seamstress about your measurements today, Seraphine continued, circling the room slowly. Her silk dress whispered against the stone with each step. Do you know what she told me? That you've lost weight again. How careless of you, to let yourself waste away when you have such important duties. The irony of the statement wasn't lost on Vivienne. She received 1 meal a day if she was lucky. Always the oldest scraps from the kitchen, always cold and barely sustaining. For the past 2 days, she'd received nothing at all. Her punishment for accidentally knocking over a silver hand mirror while cleaning, shattering it against the floor. 7 years of bad luck, Seraphine had said with a cruel smile. But Vivienne would settle for 7 hours without pain. I'm sorry, my Luna, Vivienne whispered, the words automatic after years of conditioning. Sorry. Seraphine laughed, the sound like breaking glass. You're always sorry. Sorry for breathing. Sorry for existing. Sorry for taking up space that should belong to someone worthwhile. She paused directly behind Vivienne, and the servant girl felt the Luna's fingers ghost across her shoulder. The touch made her skin crawl. Sometimes I wonder why I keep you at all. Because you enjoy it, Vivienne thought, but would never dare say. You enjoy having someone beneath you, someone to break. Someone who can't fight back. The collar burned hotter, responding to her rebellious thoughts, and Vivienne gasped at the pain. Seraphine's smile widened. Careful, pet. Your collar can sense disobedience, even the silent kind. The Luna moved away, her attention already shifting to something else. The banquet begins in an hour. You'll work in the kitchens tonight. The actual servants need assistance with serving the guests, though Moon knows why they'd trust you near anything important. She paused at the door. And Vivienne, if you embarrass me tonight, if you so much as breathe wrong in front of the visiting alphas, I'll make you wish the collar would simply kill you and be done with it. Then she was gone, leaving only the scent of expensive perfume and malice in her wake. Vivienne remained on her knees for several minutes after, waiting for her heart to stop racing, for the collar to cool back to its usual uncomfortable warmth. Other servants whispered that the Luna's treatment of her was unusually cruel, but none dared intervene. To show Vivienne kindness was to invite Seraphine's wrath upon themselves, and self-preservation won out over compassion every time. She couldn't even blame them. She would have done the same. Finally, Vivienne pushed herself to her feet, her legs trembling slightly from hunger and exhaustion. She had work to do, and the sooner she completed her tasks, the sooner she could make herself invisible. Invisibility was safety. Invisibility was survival. The castle was alive with activity as she made her way toward the kitchens, servants rushing past with linens and flowers, guards taking up positions along the main corridors. Tonight's banquet was important, celebrating a new alliance between the Grayson Pack and the Northern Territories. Alpha King Beckett had spent weeks negotiating the terms, and this feast would seal the agreement before all the noble houses. Vivienne had never spoken to the Alpha King, She'd seen him from a distance, of course. His tall frame and dark hair unmistakable even in crowds. But servants like her didn't warrant the attention of royalty, and she preferred it that way. The less notice she attracted, the better. The kitchens were chaos incarnate, with head cook Helena barking orders at a dozen assistants while pots bubbled over open fires, and the scent of roasting meat made Vivian's empty stomach clench painfully. Helena was the only person in the castle who showed her any semblance of kindness, though even that was limited to brief words and the occasional sympathetic glance. "Girl," Helena called when she spotted Vivian in the doorway. "Take those platters to the serving line, and for Moon's sake, try not to drop anything." Vivian nodded, grateful to have a task that kept her moving. Moving meant she didn't have to think. Thinking meant remembering the ache in her belly, the bruises hidden beneath her rough-spun dress, the absolute emptiness of her existence. Hours passed in a blur of motion. She carried platters of food from kitchen to serving line, each one piled high with delicacies that she would never taste. Roasted pheasant with honey glaze, fresh bread still warm from the ovens, berry tarts that glistened with sugar. Her mouth watered despite herself, and she had to look away before the hunger became unbearable. Through the open doorway to the great hall, she could hear music and laughter, the sounds of wolves enjoying their celebration. She caught glimpses of Seraphine moving through the crowd, her hand possessively on the Alpha King's arm, her smile dazzling. To everyone else, she was the perfect Luna, beautiful, gracious, the ideal match for their powerful king. Only Vivian knew the monster beneath the mask. It was well past midnight when the serving finally slowed. When most of the guests had eaten their fill and moved on to drinking and dancing, the other servants began the process of clearing tables and cleaning the great hall, but Vivian was dismissed with a curt wave from the head steward. She wasn't trusted with the valuable silverware and crystal. She should have gone back to her small corner of the servants' quarters. She should have curled up on her thin blanket and tried to sleep despite the gnawing hunger. She should have been grateful that the night had passed without incident, without punishment, without pain. But the smell of food still lingered in the air, and her stomach had moved past, growling into a hollow, painful emptiness that made her feel weak and dizzy. 2 days without food. 2 days of watching others eat their fill while she starved. Just this once, she thought. Just enough to stop the shaking in her hands. The pantry at the back of the kitchens was dark and cool, filled with barrels of grain and hanging herbs and wheels of cheese wrapped in cloth. During the chaos of the banquet, no one would notice if she slipped inside. No one would see. No one would care. Vivian's hands trembled as she reached for a heel of bread that had been set aside, too stale for the noble guests but still edible. She tore into it desperately, barely chewing before swallowing, her body screaming for sustenance. There was cold meat, too, scraps from the carving table, and she grabbed handfuls of it, eating with the desperation of someone who didn't know when the next meal would come. Tears streamed down her face as she ate, shame and relief mixing into something that tasted bitter. This was what she'd been reduced to. Hiding in the dark, stealing food like a common thief, crying over scraps that others would throw to their dogs. She was so focused on eating, on finally filling the void in her stomach, that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching. Didn't sense the presence in the doorway until it was too late. "Who's there?" The voice was deep and commanding, carrying an authority that made every nerve in Vivian's body stand at attention. She froze, a piece of bread halfway to her mouth, and slowly turned to face the doorway. Alpha King Beckett Grayson stood silhouetted in the faint light from the corridor beyond. He was even more imposing up close than she'd realized, tall and powerfully built, with dark hair that fell to his shoulders and a closely trimmed beard that framed a strong jaw. But it was his eyes that captured her attention. Golden and intense, they seemed to glow in the darkness, fixed on her with an expression she couldn't read. For a moment, neither of them moved. Vivian's mind raced with panic. She'd been caught. She'd be punished. The collar would activate, and the pain would be unbearable, and Seraphine would finally have the excuse she'd been looking for to be rid of her permanently. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the bread falling from nerveless fingers. "I'm so sorry, But the Alpha King wasn't looking at the stolen food. He was looking at her, his gaze traveling from her tangled hair, to her worn dress, to the silver collar that gleamed dully around her throat. His nostrils flared slightly, as if catching a scent, and something changed in his expression, something that looked almost like recognition. "Come here," he said, and it wasn't a request. Vivian's body moved before her mind could process the command, drawn forward by something deeper than conscious thought. The Alpha's presence was overwhelming, filling the small pantry with a power that made her wolf whimper inside her chest. That wolf was so weak, so suppressed by the collar's magic that she'd almost forgotten it existed. She stopped a few feet away from him, close enough to see the fine details of his face, close enough to catch his scent. Pine and winter wind and something wild that called to something buried deep inside her. Her hands shook, but not from fear anymore, from something else entirely. Beckett stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and reached out slowly. His fingers brushed against her collar, and the moment his skin made contact with the spelled silver, both of them gasped. The world exploded. It wasn't pain, though Vivian's body couldn't tell the difference at first. It was sensation, overwhelming and all-consuming, pouring through her like liquid fire. Emotions that weren't hers crashed into her consciousness, foreign and familiar all at once. Confusion, surprise, recognition, and beneath it all, a hunger that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with the man standing before her. But it was Beckett's reaction that truly terrified her. His eyes, already golden, began to glow with an inner light. His body went rigid, every muscle tensing as if fighting against something invisible. A low growl built in his chest, growing louder with each passing second. "No," he breathed. But his voice sounded wrong, deeper, more primal. "This can't be." Vivian tried to step back, but her legs wouldn't obey. The bond between them, whatever it was, held her frozen in place. Through it, she felt his emotions as clearly as her own. Shock, denial, and then, rising like a tidal wave, absolute fury. Not at her, she realized distantly, at something else. Someone else. "You," Beckett said, and his voice had changed completely, roughened by the presence of his wolf pushing toward the surface. "You're—" He didn't finish the sentence. His eyes rolled back and his body convulsed. And suddenly Vivian could feel what he felt. The mate bond, dormant and damaged but still there, snapping into place between them with the force of a lightning strike. Through it came memories that made no sense. Her face, but younger and smiling, his hands in her hair. The taste of wine and laughter and joy so pure it hurt. None of it was familiar, yet all of it felt true. The collar around Vivian's neck flared with heat, fighting against the bond, and she cried out in pain. But Beckett, no, not Beckett anymore. His wolf was too close to the surface, grabbed the collar with both hands and pulled. The metal should have been impossible to break, reinforced with magic specifically designed to hold her captive. But the Alpha King's strength was inhuman, fueled by something beyond rage. The collar snapped. The release was instantaneous and agonizing. Magic that had been pressing down on Vivian for 5 years suddenly vanished, and her wolf surged toward the surface with desperate hunger. She collapsed, her body unable to process the sudden freedom, her mind overwhelmed by sensation and memory and emotions that weren't entirely her own. Through the haze, she felt strong arms catch her before she hit the ground, felt herself being lifted, pressed against a chest that rumbled with a growl that should have terrified her, but instead felt like safety, like home. "Mine," Beckett's wolf growled, the word barely human. "Mine. Always mine." And then he threw back his head and roared, the sound shaking dust from the rafters and echoing through the entire castle. It was the sound of an alpha gone feral, of a wolf who had found his mate and would destroy anyone who tried to take her away. Vivian's consciousness faded, overwhelmed by too much stimulation after years of deprivation. Her last coherent thought was that the collar was gone. After 5 years of captivity, she was free. But freedom, she was learning, came with its own complications. As the sound of running footsteps filled the corridor beyond, as shouts of alarm rang through the castle, as the Alpha King's body began to shift and change into something massive and dangerous. Vivian finally understood one crucial truth. Her life had just become infinitely more complicated, and she had no idea why. Chapter 2. Shattered Memories. The roar that shook the castle walls continued long after consciousness had fled from Vivian's grasp. She drifted in darkness, aware only of sensations that made no sense. Strong arms holding her. The rumble of a growl that should have terrified her but instead felt protective. The scent of pine and winter that wrapped around her senses. When awareness finally returned, it came in fragments. Soft sheets beneath her body. The crackle of a fire. The absence of the collar's constant weight around her throat. That last realization made her eyes snap open, her hand flying to her neck to confirm what her body already knew. The collar was gone. Easy. The voice was unfamiliar, yet somehow trustworthy, carrying an authority that was different from the Alpha King's, but no less real. "You're safe. Don't try to move too quickly." Vivian's gaze focused on the man standing beside the bed. He was older than her, perhaps 35, with dark hair streaked with gray at the temples, and eyes that held a sharpness that missed nothing. He wore the formal attire of someone high-ranking, and the way he carried himself spoke of both warrior training and political acumen. "Who are you?" Her voice came out rough, unused. "Where? My name is Valor. I'm Beta to the Alpha King." He moved closer, his movements careful and deliberate, as if approaching a spooked animal. "You're in Beckett's private chambers. Do you remember what happened?" The pantry, the Alpha King finding her. The moment their eyes met and the world exploded. Vivian's breath caught as emotion crashed over her, foreign and overwhelming. Through the bond that now hummed between them, she could feel Beckett's presence somewhere nearby, wild and barely contained. "He went feral," she whispered. "Because of me. I don't understand." A sound from the corner of the room made her flinch. What she'd mistaken for shadow moved, and Vivian's heart nearly stopped as a massive wolf emerged into the firelight. It was easily twice the size of any shifter she'd ever seen, with fur so dark it seemed to absorb light, and golden eyes that burned with intelligence and barely restrained violence. "That's Beckett," Valor said quietly. "He's been in wolf form for 3 hours now. Won't shift back. Won't let anyone near you except me." The wolf moved closer to the bed, each step deliberate. Vivian should have been terrified. Every instinct should have screamed at her to run. Instead, her traitorous body relaxed, her wolf whimpering with recognition and longing. When the massive head lowered to rest on the bed beside her, she found her hand reaching out before conscious thought could intervene, fingers burying in thick fur. The wolf's eyes closed, and through the bond, she felt his satisfaction, his contentment, his absolute certainty that she belonged to him, and he would destroy anyone who tried to take her away. "I don't understand any of this," Vivian said, her fingers continuing their unconscious stroking. "Why is he acting like this? Why do I feel—" She couldn't finish. Couldn't put words to the connection that pulsed between them. Growing stronger with each passing moment, Valor settled into a chair near the fire, his expression troubled. "That's what we're trying to figure out. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Have you ever met the Alpha King before tonight?" "No. I've only seen him from a distance. I'm just a servant. I wouldn't—" But even as she spoke, something flickered at the edges of her memory. A feeling of wrongness, of something missing. The sensation of a locked door in her mind that had been sealed so long she'd forgotten it existed. "The collar you were wearing," Valor continued, his voice gentle but probing. "It wasn't just suppressing your wolf. It had spells woven into the metal that I've never seen before. Memory alteration. Identity binding. Magic that shouldn't exist. That's been forbidden for centuries. Memory alteration." The words struck something deep inside her, and suddenly the locked door in Vivian's mind began to crack. Pain lanced through her skull and she cried out, clutching her head as images flooded her consciousness with violent force. A different room, sunlight streaming through windows. Her hands younger, smoother, adorned with rings she didn't recognize. Laughter that sounded like her voice, but carried joy she couldn't remember feeling. And eyes, golden and warm. looking at her with an affection that made her chest ache. What's happening to her? Valor's voice seemed to come from very far away. The wolf beside her whined, pressing closer, and somehow his presence anchored her as more memories crashed through the barriers that had held them at bay. She saw herself in a carriage, traveling through forests toward a castle. Saw herself in a white dress, standing before an altar while a ceremony was performed. Felt the exact moment when the mate bond had snapped into place between her and the man who would become her husband. Not a stranger, not the distant alpha king she'd never spoken to. Her mate. Her Beckett. Lady Vivian Thornwick, she gasped, and the name felt right in a way her existence as a servant never had. My name is Lady Vivian Thornwick. I'm 24 years old. My father was Alpha Willem of the Thornwick pack. My mother was Luna Catherine. They're dead. They're all dead. The memories kept coming, relentless and devastating. 3 months of marriage that had been genuinely happy. She'd been nervous at first, having agreed to an arranged union with a man she'd never met. But Beckett had been patient, kind, courting her properly despite their marriage being a political arrangement. And then the bond had formed, and everything changed. They'd fallen in love with the kind of intensity that only fated mates could understand. There was a woman, Vivian continued, her voice breaking. Seraphine. She came as my lady companion. Someone recommended her, said she had connections that could help with political alliances. I trusted her. She was supposed to be my friend. The wolf's growl vibrated through the bed, and Vivian's hand tightened in his fur, drawing comfort from his presence as the worst of the memories surfaced. The night everything changed. Seraphine whispering that she needed help with something, leading her to a room filled with hooded figures and black candles, the smell of blood and dark magic, screaming that might have been her own, and then waking up with no memory of anything before, reduced to a servant, believing she'd never been anything more. 2 years after our marriage, Vivian whispered, tears streaming down her face now. I received word that my entire pack had been struck by plague. Everyone dead within weeks. My parents, my friends, everyone I grew up with. But it wasn't plague, was it? Seraphine killed them. She killed my entire pack to make sure no one could contradict her lies. Valor's expression had gone grave. I'm starting to remember too. It's fragmented, unclear. But I remember a Luna who wasn't Seraphine. I remember a wedding 5 years ago, and the bride had brown hair and blue eyes. I remember thinking something felt wrong, but being unable to identify what. How? Vivian demanded. How could she make everyone forget? How could she steal my life? Blood magic, Valor said quietly. The darkest kind. Memory alteration on this scale would require regular sacrifices to maintain. People have been disappearing from the castle and surrounding territories for years. We thought they were random attacks, isolated incidents, but if Seraphine has been feeding them to her spells... He was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Valor tensed, hand moving to the weapon at his belt, but he relaxed slightly when a familiar voice called out, Beta, Valor? It's Helena. The kitchens are chaos. Everyone asking about the Alpha King's roar. May I enter? Valor glanced at Vivian, who nodded. The elderly cook entered hesitantly, her eyes widening when she saw Vivian lying in the Alpha King's bed with the massive wolf beside her. Her gaze traveled to Vivian's face, and something in her expression shifted. Cracked. Broke open. Helena collapsed to her knees, hands covering her mouth as tears poured down her weathered cheeks. My lady, she sobbed. Oh, my lady. I remember you arriving at the castle all those years ago, so young and nervous about your wedding. I remember preparing your favorite honey cakes. I remember the way the Alpha King looked at you, like you hung the moon itself. And then one morning, everything was different. And when I tried to question it, the confusion was so overwhelming, I had to stop thinking about it at all. Helena, Vivian breathed. And suddenly the cook's small kindnesses over the past 5 years made sense. Some part of her had remembered, had tried to help despite the magic binding her thoughts. What is she doing here? The voice was sharp, imperious, and Vivian's entire body went rigid with recognition. Seraphine stood in the doorway, her beautiful face twisted with fury that she barely concealed beneath a mask of concern. I was told there was an incident, that Beckett had gone feral over some servant girl. I came to help, but I see the situation is even worse than reported. The wolf beside Vivian surged to his feet, placing his massive body between her and the Luna. His growl was deep and threatening, a clear warning that Seraphine ignored with practiced disdain. "Really, my love," she addressed the wolf as if speaking to a misbehaving pet. "This is beneath you. Send the girl away. We have guests to attend to, alliances to maintain. Whatever spell she's cast on you, get out." Valor's voice carried command that rivaled an alpha's. The Alpha King has made his wishes clear. No one enters these chambers without his express permission. That includes you, Luna Seraphine. For just a moment, something dark and dangerous flashed across Seraphine's face, something that saw Vivian as a threat to be eliminated. But she recovered quickly, her expression smoothing into wounded confusion. "I don't understand. Beckett and I have been married for 4 years. What could possibly justify this treatment?" 5 years, Vivian said softly, and Seraphine's gaze snapped to her. "You were married 5 years ago, Seraphine. Except you weren't the bride. I was." The silence that followed was absolute. Seraphine's mask slipped entirely, revealing cold calculation as she assessed the situation. How much did they know? How much had they remembered? Could she salvage this? Or was it time for more drastic measures? "You're confused," Seraphine said finally, her voice dripping false sympathy. "The collar you wore was notorious for causing delusions. Poor thing. But don't worry, we'll find you proper care. Leave." This time the word came from the wolf, but it was Beckett's voice, rough and barely human, forcing its way through shifted vocal cords. "Now." Seraphine stared at the wolf that was her supposed husband, seeing perhaps for the first time that her control had truly slipped. Without another word, she turned and left, but Vivian saw the promise in her eyes. This wasn't over. Seraphine would fight to keep what she'd stolen, and she wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone who stood in her way. "We need to be careful," Valor said once the door closed. "If she knows you've recovered your memories, she'll act quickly. Memory magic requires regular renewal. If she performs another ritual, she'll make it permanent," Vivian finished. "She'll bind the illusion so tightly that breaking it would kill everyone still under its influence." Valor nodded grimly. "Which means we need to expose her before she has the chance. But we'll need proof, allies, and a plan. Rushing in will only get people killed." "Then what do we do?" Vivian asked. The wolf had returned to her side, his head resting in her lap, and she drew strength from his presence. "We pretend," Valor said. "You continue as a servant, but now serving Beckett personally instead of Seraphine. It will keep you close, keep you protected, and give us time to investigate without raising further alarm." It wasn't a perfect plan. It meant more humiliation, more danger, more time pretending to be less than she was. But looking at the wolf beside her, feeling the mate bond pulse with shared determination, Vivian found herself nodding. She had already survived 5 years of hell. She could survive a few more weeks if it meant reclaiming everything Seraphine had stolen. Chapter 3. The Hunt for Truth. The announcement came at breakfast, delivered by Beckett himself in the great hall before the assembled nobility. Vivian stood 3 paces behind him, dressed in the simple gray uniform of a personal servant, her eyes downcast in a posture of submission that made her want to scream. But this was the plan. This was survival. "Effective immediately," Beckett said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "The servant known as Vivian will be reassigned to my personal service. She will attend to my chambers, my meals, and accompany me to all official functions requiring assistance." The murmurs that rippled through the hall were expected. What wasn't expected was Seraphine's reaction. The Luna, seated at the high table with perfect posture and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, went absolutely still. Only someone watching closely would have seen the way her fingers tightened on her goblet, the way her scent sharpened with barely contained fury. "My love," Seraphine said, her voice honey-sweet but with an edge that could cut. Surely this is unnecessary. I can recommend several more suitable servants from among my own staff. Ones with proper training and references. The decision is made, Beckett replied. And for the first time in 5 years, he used his alpha command against her in public. The force of it rolled through the hall, making lesser wolves bow their heads instinctively. Seraphine's body jerked as if struck, her carefully maintained composure cracking for just a moment. The silence that followed was deafening. An alpha king commanding his own Luna to submission was unheard of, a breach of protocol so severe that it raised immediate questions. But Beckett offered no explanation, simply returned to his seat and resumed eating as if nothing unusual had occurred. Vivian kept her expression neutral, but through the mate bond, she felt Beckett's satisfaction. The first move had been made. Let Seraphine wonder. Let her worry. Let her make mistakes. The days that followed settled into a careful routine. Vivian moved through the castle with her head down, performing her duties with the same meticulous care she'd shown for 5 years. But now she was gathering information, observing, listening to conversations that servants were meant to ignore. She learned which nobles seemed uncomfortable around Seraphine, which ones avoided the Luna's gaze, which ones had lost family members to the mysterious disappearances that plagued the region. Each observation was reported to Valor during their carefully orchestrated meetings in unused corridors and forgotten chambers. There's a pattern, Valor said one afternoon, spreading documents across a table in what had once been a storage room. The disappearances cluster around specific dates. Every 6 months, like clockwork, someone vanishes, sometimes more than one. And they're always from the fringes, travelers, servants, people no one would miss immediately. Vivian studied the dates, her stomach churning. She's been doing this for 5 years. 23 people, you said? 23 that we can confirm. There may be more. Valor's expression was grim. The magic she's using requires constant renewal. Fresh blood, fresh lives. To maintain an illusion of this magnitude. If we don't stop her soon. He was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Both of them tensed, hands moving toward weapons. But the voice that called out was elderly and familiar. Beta Valor? It's Cornelius. I was told I might find you here. Valor opened the door cautiously, admitting the 70-year-old Alpha, whose pack controlled territories to the north. Cornelius moved slowly, his body showing the wear of decades of leadership, but his mind was sharp as ever. I've been thinking, Cornelius said without preamble, settling into a chair with a grateful sigh, about that day in the Alpha King's chambers, when he touched me while holding her hand, and everything came flooding back. The memories of the true wedding, of Lady Vivian as she was meant to be. It got me wondering, if it worked on me, could it work on others? That's what we're hoping, Valor replied. But we need to be strategic about who we approach. If word gets back to Seraphine before we're ready, she'll accelerate her plans. Vivian finished. Valor intercepted messages suggesting she's preparing for another ritual, something more permanent than what she's done before. Cornelius's weathered face grew troubled. Then we need help beyond what the 3 of us can provide. There's someone I know, someone who might be able to counter magic of this nature, but she's difficult to reach. Who? Vivian asked. Her name is Moira. She's a Feticera, a witch of the old ways, before shifters and humans separated into distinct societies. She lives in the Silverlight Mountains, in territory that's been sacred and neutral since the first packs formed. No Alpha can claim it, no violence can be done there without severe magical consequences. It's why she's survived this long, despite having knowledge that some would kill to possess or suppress. Valor and Vivian exchanged glances. Would she help us? Valor asked. Moira has no love for blood magic, Cornelius said. She follows the old laws, the ones that existed before power-hungry wolves started twisting magic to their own ends. If we can reach her, if we can explain what Seraphine has done, yes, I believe she would help. Then we go tonight. Beckett's voice came from the doorway, and all 3 of them started. None of them had heard him approach, which spoke to either his skill or their distraction. The Alpha King stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. Vivian and I will travel in wolf form through the forest. It's faster, and less likely to be noticed than a formal delegation. The journey will take all night, Cornelius warned. Even in wolf form, the Silverlight Mountains are treacherous. And if Seraphine realizes you're both gone, let me worry about Seraphine, Beckett said, his tone brooking no argument. Valor, you'll spread word that I've taken a hunting party into the deep woods. Not unusual, and it gives us cover for being away from the castle. Cornelius, I need you to stay here and watch Seraphine. Note anyone she meets with, any unusual activities. Can you do that? The old alpha nodded. I can. They waited until well after dark before leaving, when the castle had settled into its nighttime rhythms and the guards on the walls were focused outward rather than in. Vivian followed Beckett through passages she'd never known existed, stone corridors hidden behind false walls and beneath unused chambers. The castle was riddled with secrets, she realized. How many had Seraphine discovered? How many did she use for her own purposes? They emerged in the forest beyond the castle walls, the night air cool and crisp with approaching autumn. Beckett turned to her, his golden eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Can you shift? He asked quietly. Your wolf was suppressed for so long, I know it's difficult. I can try. Vivian closed her eyes, reaching for the part of herself that had been locked away. The wolf was there. She could feel it, but the connection was damaged. Like a limb that had been asleep too long, she couldn't quite make it respond. Frustration built in her chest. I can't. I'm sorry, Don't apologize. Beckett's hand found hers, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. We'll work on it. Your wolf will heal. It just needs time. For now, ride on my back as you did when you were unconscious. Hold on tight and don't let go. No matter what happens. He shifted before she could respond, his body flowing from human to wolf, with a grace that spoke of decades of practice. The transformation was beautiful and terrible all at once, bones reshaping, fur emerging, until the massive black wolf stood before her. He was enormous in this form, easily large enough to carry her weight. Vivian climbed onto his back, her arms wrapping around his thick neck, her legs gripping his sides. His fur was soft and warm, and through the mate bond, she felt his satisfaction at having her close. Then they were moving, and coherent thought became impossible. Beckett ran through the forest with a speed that defied belief. Trees blurred past, the ground disappearing beneath them in great leaping strides. Vivian buried her face in his fur, trusting him completely, as he navigated terrain she could barely see in the darkness. Through the bond, she felt his exhilaration, his wolf reveling in the freedom of the run after so many hours confined to human form and political maneuvering. They ran for hours, covering ground that would have taken days on foot or horseback. The forest gradually gave way to rocky hills, then to mountain paths that grew steeper and more treacherous. Vivian's arms ached from holding on, her body exhausted from the constant motion. But she didn't complain. This was necessary. This was survival. Dawn was breaking over the mountains when they finally reached their destination. A small cabin sat nestled in a valley, protected on all sides by towering peaks, smoke rising from its chimney in lazy spirals. The air here felt different, charged with magic so old and powerful that it made Vivian's skin prickle. Beckett shifted back to human form, and Vivian slid from his back on trembling legs. Before either of them could approach the cabin, the door opened, and a woman emerged. Moira was ancient, her face lined with decades of wisdom and her hair pure white, but her eyes were sharp and knowing, missing nothing as they traveled from Beckett to Vivian and back again. When she spoke, her voice carried an accent that no living shifter used anymore, words shaped by a tongue that predated modern language. An Alpha King and his stolen mate, she said. And it wasn't a question. You've come seeking help to break blood magic that should never have been cast. Come inside, both of you. We have much to discuss, and dawn is no time to conduct business standing in my garden. The cabin's interior was larger than it appeared from outside, filled with herbs hanging from the rafters and shelves lined with bottles containing substances Vivian couldn't identify. Moira moved with surprising agility for someone her age, gesturing for them to sit at a worn wooden table while she prepared tea with practiced motions. Tell me everything, she said, settling across from them with her own cup. Leave nothing out. I can smell the blood magic on you both, can see the scars it's left on your souls. But I need to hear the story from your mouths. Beckett spoke first, his voice steady despite the rage that simmered beneath his words. He explained about Seraphine, about waking one day to find his memories altered, about 4 years of believing a lie until the moment the true mate bond had snapped into place with Vivienne. Vivienne added her own experiences, the collar, the abuse, the 5 years of believing herself a worthless servant. Moira listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When they finished, she sat in silence for a long moment, fingers drumming against her teacup. Substitution magic, she finally said, combined with memory alteration on a scale I haven't seen in 2 centuries. The last time someone attempted this, it took 12 blood sacrifices just to initiate the spell. To maintain it for 5 years. She shook her head. 23 deaths, you said? That tracks with the mathematics of it. She would need to renew the major bindings every 6 months, with smaller reinforcements monthly. Can you break it? Beckett asked. Yes, Moira said, but not easily, and not without risk. A counterspell powerful enough to shatter magic of this magnitude would require significant energy. The full moon would be ideal. Its power could fuel the working without requiring additional sacrifices. But the next full moon is 2 weeks away. Do we have 2 weeks? Vivienne asked quietly. Valor found evidence that Seraphine is planning something. Another ritual, but different. Stronger. Moira's expression grew grave. Permanent binding. If she's feeling threatened, she might attempt to weave her life force directly into the illusion. It would make the spell unbreakable. Killing her would kill everyone still under its influence. The magical backlash would be catastrophic. How long would that ritual take? Beckett demanded. Hours. Perhaps a full night with the proper preparations. But once begun, it couldn't be stopped without disaster. Moira stood, moving to a shelf and pulling down several leather-bound books. I'll need time to gather the components for a counterspell. Rare herbs, specific crystals, elements that have been touched by wolf magic without being corrupted by it. Some of these I have, others I'll need to acquire. Whatever you need, Beckett said. Name your price. I don't work for payment, Alpha King. I work because blood magic is an abomination that corrupts everything it touches. Your mate here, she gestured to Vivienne, carries scars that will never fully heal. The 23 who died screaming to fuel Seraphine's ambitions deserve justice. That's all the payment I require. She began pulling books from shelves, spreading them across her work table with practiced ease. I'll need approximately 10 days to prepare everything. When I'm ready, I'll come to your castle. But I'll need one thing from you in return. When the time comes to break the spell, I'll require the combined power of at least 12 alphas. Their wolf spirits, channeled through you, will provide the energy needed to shatter Seraphine's work. The Grand Council, Beckett said. If I call an emergency session, I can have 24 alphas assembled within days. Good. Then we have a plan. Moira's sharp eyes softened slightly as she looked at Vivienne. Child, your wolf is damaged, but not broken. Each day, the distance from that cursed collar grows, the stronger your connection will become. Practice shifting in safe spaces. Let your mate guide you. His presence will help anchor your wolf as she relearns freedom. Vivienne nodded, throat tight with emotion. For 5 years, she'd believed herself broken beyond repair. To hear that healing was possible, that she wasn't permanently damaged. The journey back to the castle took most of the day. They stopped only once, at a stream where Beckett finally convinced Vivienne to rest. She'd been running on adrenaline and determination, but her body was exhausted from the night's travel and the emotional weight of everything Moira had revealed. We're going to fix this, Beckett said, settling beside her on the bank. Seraphine will pay for what she's done. Every lie, every death, every moment of suffering she caused you, she'll answer for all of it. I keep thinking about the 23, Vivienne admitted. 23 people who died just so she could play at being Luna. Did any of them know why? Did they understand what was happening to them? Probably not. Blood magic victims rarely do. Beckett's arm slipped around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. But we'll make sure they're remembered. When this is over, we'll build a memorial. We'll make certain their names are never forgotten. They sat in silence for a while. the only sound the burbling of the stream and the wind through the trees. This was the first time they'd been truly alone since the mate bond had formed, without the pressure of political maneuvering or the weight of conspiracy hanging over them. "Tell me about before," Vivian said quietly. "About the 3 months we had together before Seraphine stole it all. I have the memories now, but they feel distant, like I'm watching someone else's life." Beckett's expression softened with remembered happiness. "You were nervous the first time we met. The marriage had been arranged by our parents before they died, and you'd never seen me before. I'll never forget walking into that reception hall and seeing you standing there in a blue dress, looking like you wanted to run. Did I? Almost. But then I made some terrible joke about the weather, and you laughed, and I was lost." His fingers traced patterns on her arm. "We spent that first month just talking, learning each other. I'd never expected to find a true mate through an arranged marriage. Those bonds are so rare that most shifters live their entire lives without experiencing one. But the moment our hands touched during the ceremony, the bond snapped into place, and I knew. You were mine, and I was yours. And nothing else mattered." Vivian leaned into him, letting his warmth chase away the chill of 5 lost years. "We'll have that again," she said. "When this is over, when Seraphine is dealt with and the truth is known, we'll have time to rediscover each other. To build something real. We already have something real," Beckett said, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. "This bond between us, it survived 5 years of blood magic specifically designed to destroy it. That's not weakness. That's strength. That's proof that some things can't be broken, no matter how hard someone tries." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, and through the bond, Vivian felt the depth of his devotion. They still had obstacles ahead. Seraphine, the Grand Council, the delicate political situation that had been built on lies. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was this. They had found each other again. And this time, nothing would tear them apart. Chapter 4. Shadows and Wolves. The 3 alphas arrived at dawn, their retinue spreading through the castle courtyard with military precision. Vivian watched from an upper window as Beckett greeted them formally, each exchange carefully choreographed according to pack protocol. But even from this distance, she could sense something wrong about these visitors. Their wolves carried a taint that made her own damaged spirit recoil instinctively. "Alpha Lennox of Ironwood," Valor murmured beside her, pointing to the largest of the 3. "Known for brutality against his omegas, there are rumors his pack members disappear regularly, but no one investigates because he provides valuable timber to the kingdom." The second man was leaner, with calculating eyes that missed nothing. "Alpha Jasper of Riverbend. Political opportunist. He's been positioning himself for higher status for years, but lacks the strength to challenge established powers directly. The type to work through manipulation rather than force." The third was younger, perhaps 40, with an easy smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Alpha Quinn of Ashbury. Charming on the surface, utterly ruthless beneath. His mate died under suspicious circumstances 3 years ago, but the investigation was quietly buried, and Seraphine invited all of them," Vivian said. "Why? That's what we need to discover." Valor's expression was grim. "Beckett's intelligence network indicates they've been meeting privately with Seraphine for months. Whatever she's planning, they're part of it." The formal dinner that evening was an exercise in political theater. Vivian moved through the great hall in her servant's gray, refilling wine goblets and clearing plates, while the nobility discussed alliances and trade agreements. She kept her head down, her posture submissive, every inch the invisible servant that years of abuse had taught her to be. But now she listened. Now she observed. Now she gathered the pieces of Seraphine's conspiracy with cold determination. "The northern territories grow restless," Lennox was saying, his voice carrying the rough growl of someone who preferred violence to diplomacy. "They need a stronger hand. The Alpha King has been distracted lately. Perhaps the Luna could provide guidance where her mate falters." Seraphine's laugh was musical and false. "You flatter me, Alpha Lennox. My husband is quite capable of managing his kingdom. Though I admit, there have been concerns about his recent behavior. This obsession with a mere servant is troubling." "Obsession?" Quinn leaned forward, interest sharpening his features. I've heard whispers, but thought them exaggerated. See for yourself. Seraphine gestured toward Vivian, who was carefully not reacting to being discussed as if she weren't present. The girl he's claimed for his personal service. She's cast some spell on him, clearly. Perhaps love magic, or a charm bought from hedge witches. It's the only explanation for why he would embarrass me so publicly. If she's using magic, Jasper said thoughtfully, that would be grounds for execution. Blood magic, specifically, carries a death sentence under pack law. Indeed it does. Seraphine's smile was sharp as broken glass, though proving such things can be difficult. Unless, of course, one has witnesses willing to testify to suspicious behavior. Reliable witnesses. Alphas, for instance, whose word carries weight before the Grand Council. Through the mate bond, Vivian felt Beckett's fury spike dangerously. He sat at the high table, maintaining his mask of indifference, but she knew how close he was to losing control. The implication was clear. Seraphine was recruiting allies who would lie for her, who would corroborate whatever story she needed to eliminate threats. My Luna, Beckett said, his voice carrying just enough edge to make Seraphine falter. Perhaps you should be careful about accusing members of my household of capital crimes without evidence. Some might interpret such accusations as overstepping. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Seraphine's smile didn't waver, but her scent sharpened with barely concealed rage. Of course, my love. I merely express concern for your well-being, as any devoted mate would. The dinner continued, but the undercurrent of tension never dissipated. Vivienne moved through her duties mechanically, her mind racing with the implications of what she'd heard. Seraphine was building a case against her, recruiting powerful alphas to testify that she was using forbidden magic on the Alpha King. It was brilliant in its simplicity. Turn the truth on its head, accuse the victim of the very crime the perpetrator had committed. When the formal meal finally ended, and the guests retired to their chambers, Vivian slipped away to return serving platters to the kitchens. The corridor was empty, lit only by torches that cast dancing shadows on stone walls. She'd traversed this path hundreds of times over 5 years, knew every turn and doorway by heart, which was why she immediately noticed when someone stepped from an alcove to block her path. Alpha Lennox was even more imposing up close, his bulk filling the narrow corridor. His eyes traveled over her with an assessment that made her skin crawl, not with desire, but with the calculating interest of someone evaluating property. You, he said, reaching out to grab her arm. His grip was bruising, fingers digging into flesh hard enough to leave marks. There's something about you, something that doesn't fit. Vivian tried to pull away, but his hold only tightened. Please, Alpha. I have duties. I can smell power on you. Lennox continued, dragging her closer despite her resistance. His nose traced along her throat, scenting her in a violation that made her want to vomit. Old power, noble blood. You're no common servant, are you? What game is the Alpha King playing? Before Vivian could respond, before she could scream or fight or do anything beyond freeze in terror, Lennox was suddenly airborne. He flew backward into the stone wall hard enough to crack mortar, his body crumpling to the ground as Beckett materialized between them. The Alpha King's eyes glowed pure gold, his wolf so close to the surface that his form seemed to flicker between human and beast. When he spoke, his voice carried layers of command that made even another alpha instinctively bare his throat. You dare touch her. Lennox struggled to rise, his own wolf responding to the challenge. But Beckett's power crashed over him in waves. The sheer force of it drove Lennox back to his knees, his head bowing despite every instinct screaming to fight back. She is mine, Beckett growled. My servant, my responsibility, my property. The last word was deliberately chosen, playing to the assumption that he'd simply claimed a favored servant, rather than protecting his true mate. Touch her again, and I will challenge you formally. Alpha to alpha, to the death. Lennox remained on his knees, chest heaving, caught between the humiliation of submission and the survival instinct that recognized Beckett's superior strength. Finally, he managed to force words through a throat tight with suppressed rage. My apologies, Alpha King. I overstepped. Yes, you did. Beckett's hand found Vivian's, pulling her behind him protectively. "Return to your chambers. All of you." This last was directed at Jasper and Quinn, who had emerged to investigate the commotion. "And remember that what is mine is not to be questioned or touched by anyone." The 3 visiting alphas retreated, but Vivian saw the calculation in their eyes. They'd witnessed Beckett's possessiveness, his barely controlled violence over a servant girl. It would be reported to Seraphine, would feed into whatever narrative she was constructing. Alone in the corridor, Beckett finally released his death grip on control. His body shook with the effort of not shifting, not hunting down Lennox and tearing him apart for daring to touch Vivian. Through the bond, she felt his wolf raging against the constraints of civilization and political necessity. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have been more careful. Don't." His voice was rough. "Don't apologize for existing. Don't apologize for being targeted by predators who see you as prey." He turned to face her, and the raw emotion in his golden eyes stole her breath. "I can't do this much longer, Vivian. I can't watch you play servant while Seraphine circles like a vulture. I can't smile and be diplomatic while visiting alphas think they can put their hands on you." "5 more days," she said, touching his face gently. "Moira needs 5 more days to prepare everything." 5 days. If Seraphine sits still," Vivian added, voice low. "But if she moves first, we move faster. We don't wait while she sharpens the knife. Then we expose Seraphine before the entire Grand Council. And this nightmare ends. 5 days." Beckett leaned into her touch, drawing strength from the contact. "And if she tries another ritual before then we stop her. Whatever it takes." That night, after Beckett had walked her to the servants' quarters and returned to his own chambers to maintain appearances, Vivian tried to sleep, but her mind replayed Lennox's violation, his nose on her skin, his words about smelling power and noble blood. How much did he truly suspect? How much would he tell Seraphine? When sleep finally claimed her, it brought nightmares. She was back in the room with hooded figures and black candles, Seraphine's face looming over her as magic burned through her veins. She felt the collar snapping around her throat, felt her memories being ripped away, felt herself dying and being reborn as someone less, someone broken, someone worthless. She woke screaming. Strong arms caught her before she could fall from the narrow bed, pulling her against a chest that rumbled with soothing sounds. Beckett. He'd come to her despite the risk, unable to stay away when the mate bond sang with her distress. "I'm here," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe. I won't let her hurt you again." Vivian clung to him, her body shaking with sobs she'd suppressed for 5 years. All the pain, all the humiliation, all the moments she'd wanted to die rather than face another day of abuse. It poured out of her in a flood that left her raw and gasping. Beckett held her through it all, his presence the only anchor in a storm of remembered trauma. When the sobs finally subsided, he gently tilted her face up to meet his gaze. "I love you," he said simply. "I loved you 5 years ago when we first bonded. I loved you through 4 years of not knowing why I felt incomplete. And I love you now, knowing the truth. That will never change." The kiss that followed was different from their first tentative reconnection. This was claiming, possessive, a declaration that she belonged to him, and he to her, regardless of Seraphine's machinations. Vivian responded with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his hair as years of denied passion finally found release. When they came together, it was with the desperation of mates who had been forcibly separated too long. The bond between them sang with completion, with rightness, with a connection so profound that for those moments, nothing else existed. Not Seraphine, not the visiting alphas, not the dangerous game they were playing. Only this. 2 souls finally, fully reunited. Afterward, they lay tangled together in her narrow bed, Beckett's arms wrapped around her protectively. Through the bond, Vivian felt his satisfaction, his contentment, his absolute certainty that she was his, and he was hers. "I should go," he murmured, though he made no move to leave. "If someone finds me here—" "Stay," Vivian whispered. "Just until dawn, please." He stayed. Chapter 5. Racing the Darkness. Seraphine woke from her uneasy sleep with agony lancing through her chest. The pain was so sharp, so unexpected, that she rolled from her bed and hit the floor on hands and knees, gasping for breath. Through the magical connection she'd forged 5 years ago, she felt it. The true mate, bond between Beckett and Vivienne pulsing with newly completed power. They'd consummated their connection. The bond she'd worked so hard to suppress, to bury beneath layers of blood magic and stolen identity, was now fully activated. And it was destroying everything she'd built. "No," she hissed, clutching at her chest where the false bond to Beckett had existed. That connection was cracking, splintering apart as the true bond asserted itself. Not now. Not when I'm so close. She'd known this moment would come eventually. Had prepared contingencies for when her carefully constructed illusion began to fail. But she'd expected more time. Months, perhaps. Not hours. Moving to her writing desk, Seraphine pulled out parchment and quill with trembling hands. The message she penned was brief and urgent, addressed to the 3 hooded figures who'd helped her 5 years ago, the blood mages who'd taught her the rituals that had made this all possible. "Tonight," she wrote, "the permanent binding. Gather everything needed. I'll provide the sacrifices." She sealed the letter with wax and her personal signet, then called for a servant to deliver it with all haste. As the girl scurried away, Seraphine moved to her hidden chest, the one even Beckett didn't know existed, and began pulling out supplies: black candles, a ceremonial blade, vials of substances that no decent wolf would touch. The permanent binding ritual was dangerous, something she'd hoped to avoid attempting. It would weave her life force directly into the illusion, making the spell unbreakable. But it came with risks. If anything went wrong during the casting, if the ritual was interrupted or improperly executed, the magical backlash could kill her instantly. But what choice did she have? Vivienne had her memories back. Beckett knew the truth. That meddling beta was investigating. And worst of all, she'd seen the way several older pack members looked at her lately, with confusion, with the beginnings of suspicion. The magic was failing faster than anticipated. By tonight, she would either cement her position permanently or die trying. The ritual required specific sacrifices. Not random travelers this time, but people whose very existence threatened her rule. People who'd shown signs of resistance to the memory alteration. People who could become rallying points for opposition. Helena, the cook who'd maintained fragments of truth despite the spells. 3 guards who'd been unusually protective of Vivienne. And Cornelius, that ancient alpha whose resistance to magic had always been frustratingly strong. Seraphine smiled coldly as she made her list. Tonight, all her problems would be eliminated at once. In a rarely used section of the castle, Valor read the intercepted message with mounting horror. He'd been tracking Seraphine's communications for days, had bribed a servant to bring him copies of anything suspicious. But this... "Beckett," he said urgently when the Alpha King arrived at their meeting spot. "We're out of time. Seraphine's moving tonight." He thrust the parchment forward, watching Beckett's expression darken as he read. The implications were immediate and devastating. A permanent binding would make Seraphine untouchable. Killing her would trigger a cascade that would kill everyone still under the memory spell's influence. Potentially hundreds of wolves across multiple packs. "She's listed the sacrifices," Valor continued. "Helena, your personal guards Marcus, Donovan, and Pierce, and Cornelius. All people who've shown resistance or who know the truth. How long do we have?" Beckett's voice was deadly calm, the kind of calm that preceded volcanic eruptions. "The ritual requires darkness and specific celestial alignments. Based on what Moira told us about blood magic, I'd estimate she'll begin at midnight. That gives us 8 hours. Not nearly long enough to evacuate everyone she's listed, gather the Grand Council, and prepare Moira's counterspell." Beckett's hands clenched into fists. "We'll have to force the confrontation now. Make our stand before she can complete her ritual." "The Grand Council has been gathering since you called the emergency session yesterday," Valor reminded him. 24 alphas are already in residence, more arriving by the hour. If we move now, we expose everything before we're fully prepared." Beckett finished. "But if we wait, Seraphine makes herself invulnerable. There's no good choice here. A soft knock interrupted them. Cornelius entered, his aged face grave. "I've been watching Seraphine as requested. She sent for her blood mages. They arrived through the eastern gate an hour ago, concealed in delivery wagons. 3 of them, judging by the magical signatures I could sense. Then we're committed." Beckett straightened. Decision made. "Valor, gather everyone on Seraphine's list and move them to secure locations. Tell them nothing except that it's the Alpha King's command. Cornelius, I need you to quietly spread word among the assembled Alphas that an emergency session of the Grand Council will convene this evening. Required attendance, no exceptions." "And what reason do I give for such urgency?" Cornelius asked. "Tell them there's been a challenge to the Luna's legitimacy that requires immediate resolution. That should be intriguing enough to ensure full attendance without revealing too much." As Valor and Cornelius hurried to their tasks, Beckett closed his eyes and reached through the mate bond. "Vivian," he sent. "Where are you?" The response came immediately, flavored with concern and curiosity. "Servants' quarters." "What's wrong?" "Everything's accelerated. Seraphine's planning her permanent binding for tonight. We're moving now, this evening. Can you get to Moira's arranged location without being seen?" "I can try. What do I need to do?" "Be ready to fight for your life. For our life together. This ends tonight, one way or another." The sun was setting when Moira materialized in the castle's ancient chapel, the one place on the grounds that maintained enough residual sacred magic to allow her transportation spell to function. The effort of crossing such a distance without proper preparation left her visibly drained, but her eyes remained sharp and focused. "Where is she?" Moira demanded when Helena found her. "This way, please." The elderly cook led her through hidden passages to a small chamber where Vivian waited, still wearing her servant's gray. "We don't have the full moon," Moira said without preamble, setting down her heavy bag of supplies. "We don't have the ideal preparations. What we're attempting tonight is going to be dangerous and potentially unpredictable. Are you prepared for that?" "I'm prepared to do whatever necessary to stop Seraphine." Vivian's voice was steady, despite the fear Moira could smell on her. "Good. Because this is going to hurt." Moira began pulling items from her bag. Crystals, herbs, a bowl made from carved bone. "The counter spell I'll cast requires a focal point. Something that embodies the truth Seraphine tried to destroy. That focal point is you. What do I need to do?" "Stand before the assembled council as yourself. Not the servant Seraphine made you, but Lady Vivian Thornwick, rightful mate of the Alpha King. Let every wolf present see you, sent you. Witness the mate bond that she tried so hard to erase. That truth will create fractures in her magic, and those fractures are what I'll exploit." Helena stepped forward with a bundle of cloth she'd been guarding carefully. "I saved this," she said softly. "Your wedding dress from the true ceremony. I hid it away where Seraphine's spells couldn't touch it. I didn't understand why I was doing it at the time. The magic made thinking about such things painful, but some part of me knew it was important. The dress was beautiful," Vivian realized as Helena helped her into it. Deep blue velvet embroidered with silver thread, fitted perfectly to her frame despite 5 years of weight loss and abuse. It had belonged to Beckett's mother, she remembered now. A tradition in his family to pass the formal Luna gown down through generations. "Your hair," Helena murmured, working the tangles free with gentle efficiency. "When you first arrived, you wore it in braids woven with blue ribbons. You looked like spring itself. Piece by piece, Vivian transformed. The servant's gray was replaced by noble finery. Her hair, always kept in a tight, submissive bun, was arranged in the elaborate style befitting a Luna. Helena even produced jewelry, simple but elegant pieces that had been part of Vivian's trousseau. When she finally looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. For 5 years she'd been nobody. Worthless. Less than worthless. But the woman staring back at her now was someone different. Someone who'd survived impossible odds and was ready to reclaim what had been stolen. Beckett arrived as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky. He froze in the doorway when he saw her, his expression cycling through shock, awe, and fierce possessiveness in rapid succession. "Vivian," he breathed. "Do I look like a Luna?" she asked. needing his confirmation, his strength. "You look like my Luna, my mate, my everything." He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "What we're about to do is dangerous. If Seraphine has even a moment to complete her ritual, if she manages to bind herself permanently before we can stop her, then we don't give her that moment." Vivian squeezed his hands. "We end this, tonight." Beckett's gaze dropped to her throat, to the bare skin where the silver collar had once rested. "There's one more thing. A claiming bite. A permanent mark that will make our bond visible to every shifter who sees you. It will hurt, but it will also serve as undeniable proof of our connection. Among our kind, a fresh claiming mark trumps forged memories and forged titles. No alpha worth the name can look at it and pretend not to see. Do it." He pulled her close, his breath warm against her neck. "I love you," he whispered. "Remember that, no matter what happens in the council chamber." The mate bond's pulse rolled across the chamber like heat from a forge. Older wolves flinched first, their instincts older than any spell. The bite was sharp and possessive, his teeth breaking skin and leaving a mark that would never fully fade. Through the mate bond, Vivian felt his wolf claiming her, declaring to any who would challenge that she was his, and he was hers. The pain was brief but intense, followed by a rush of warmth that spread from the bite outward through her entire body. Power rippled out from them in waves, strong enough that wolves throughout the castle paused in confusion. In their guest chambers, Lennox, Jasper, and Quinn all felt the surge and knew immediately that something significant had just occurred. "It's time," Moira said, having witnessed the claiming in respectful silence. "The council awaits. Remember? I need 15 minutes of uninterrupted concentration once I begin the counterspell. If Seraphine or her allies attack before then, you must hold them off. They won't touch you," Beckett promised. "Or her. Not while I still draw breath." As they made their way toward the council chamber, Vivian felt the weight of what was about to happen settling on her shoulders. Everything she'd survived, everything she'd lost, all came down to this moment. One final confrontation between truth and lies, between the woman she truly was and the false Luna who'd tried to erase her. The massive doors to the council chamber stood before them, and beyond those doors, 24 alphas waited in confusion about why they'd been summoned with such urgency. Beyond those doors, Seraphine waited, likely already suspecting that her plans had been discovered. Beckett's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "Together?" he asked. "Together," Vivian confirmed. The doors opened, and they stepped forward to face their destiny. Chapter 6. Truth Unveiled. The silence that fell over the Grand Council chamber when Vivian entered was absolute. 24 alphas, representing every major pack in the kingdom, turned as one to stare at the woman in the blue velvet gown walking beside their alpha king. The dress itself was legendary. Every wolf of age recognized it as the traditional Luna gown passed through the Grayson line for generations. But it was the claiming bite on Vivian's throat that made several of the older alphas rise from their seats in shock. Fresh and red, the mark pulsed with unmistakable mate bond energy. The physical presence of Vivian as Beckett's marked mate began causing immediate fractures in Seraphine's carefully constructed illusion. Some wolves blinked rapidly, confusion crossing their features as contradictory memories warred for dominance in their minds. Seraphine sat at the high table, her perfect composure cracking for just an instant before she recovered. Her green eyes tracked Vivian's movement with barely concealed murder, her fingers gripping her goblet so tightly the metal bent. "What is the meaning of this?" Alpha Lennox demanded, though his voice carried uncertainty. He'd smelled noble blood on Vivian just yesterday, but seeing her transformed into obvious royalty created cognitive dissonance that his wolf couldn't reconcile. "This," Beckett said, his voice carrying absolute authority, "is Lady Vivian Thornwick, daughter of Alpha Willem and Luna Catherine of the Thornwick Pack, and my true mate, bonded to me 5 years ago in a ceremony witnessed by many of you in this room." The murmurs that rippled through the assembled alphas ranged from confusion to outright denial. Several looked to Seraphine, who had risen from her seat with wounded dignity painted across her features. "My love," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. "What game is this? I am your mate. We've been married for 4 years. Everyone here knows this. 5 years. Vivian spoke for the first time, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You've been married 5 years, Seraphine. But you weren't the bride. I was. This is madness, Seraphine laughed. But the sound was brittle. The girl is clearly disturbed. Perhaps the stress of her position as servant has broken her mind. She needs care, not... Then explain the documents. Beckett gestured to Valor, who stepped forward with a leather case. From it, he withdrew official parchments bearing royal seals. Marriage contract signed 5 years ago. Witnessed by 6 anciens currently present in this chamber. Every signature verified, every seal authentic. Valor laid the documents on the central table where all could see. The alphas crowded around, studying the papers with mounting confusion. The signatures were undeniably real. Several of the witnessing alphas could see their own marks on the parchment, yet none consciously remembered making them. I don't understand, one of the younger alphas admitted. I remember Seraphine always being Luna, but my signature is here, dated 5 years ago, for a Lady Vivian Thornwick, because your memories were altered, Cornelius said, rising from his seat with effort. At 70 years old, he commanded respect through sheer survival and wisdom. Blood magic. Memory manipulation on a scale not seen in centuries. I know because my memories were recently restored through contact with the true mate bond between the Alpha King and Lady Vivian. I remember the real wedding. I remember 3 months of Luna Vivian governing with grace and compassion. And I remember waking one morning to find everything changed, with Seraphine in her place and everyone accepting it as if it had always been so. Blood magic? Several alphas recoiled at the words. Blood magic was the most forbidden practice in shifter law, punishable by immediate execution. That's impossible. Maintaining an illusion of that magnitude would require regular sacrifices, Vivian finished. 23 people over 5 years. Travelers, servants, pack members who visited the court and never returned home. All killed to fuel the spell that stole my identity and my life. Seraphine's mask finally shattered. Her beautiful face twisted with cold calculation as she assessed the situation. Too many had heard. Too many were beginning to question. The fractures in her magic were spreading too quickly to contain. You think you're clever? She hissed at Vivian. You think exposing me will fix everything? I've woven myself so deeply into this kingdom's fabric that removing me would destroy it. Every alliance, every treaty, every decision made over 5 years, all tied to my position as Luna. Challenge me, and you risk civil war. Is that a confession? Beckett's voice was deadly calm. Are you admitting to using blood magic? Seraphine laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. I'm admitting that I took what should have been mine from the beginning. You never would have chosen me naturally, would you? You'd have been content with this weak little Omega who couldn't even defend herself against my spells. But I deserve to be Luna. I earned it through power and sacrifice and sheer will. 23 lives? A small price for greatness. The horror on the faces of the assembled alphas was immediate and visceral. Several drew weapons instinctively, wolf eyes glowing as their beasts pushed toward the surface. Confession of blood magic was unthinkable. To boast about it was madness. Seize her, Beckett commanded, but Seraphine was already moving. She pulled a vial from her sleeve, shattering it against the floor. Black smoke erupted, filling the chamber with choking darkness that reeked of blood and death. Through the chaos, 3 hooded figures materialized, her blood mages, summoned by the same dark magic they'd used to help her steal a crown. Now, Moira! Beckett shouted. The ancient witch stepped from the shadows where she'd been waiting, her white hair seeming to glow with inner light. She carried a bowl carved from bone, filled with crystalline water and herbs that no living shifter could name. Her voice rose in a chant that predated written language, words of power that made the air itself tremble. Stop her! Seraphine shrieked at her mages, but Valor and a dozen loyal guards formed a protective circle around Moira. The blood mages threw curses and dark spells, but they shattered against the combined will of so many wolves united in purpose. Moira's chant grew louder, more insistent. She drew a circle on the floor with ash from her bowl, and where the ash touched stone, silver light began to spread. The light reached for Vivienne like seeking fingers, and when it touched her, the mate bond between her and Beckett flared with power that lit the entire chamber. Through that bond, through that connection of absolute truth, Moira channeled the combined strength of 24 alphas. The counterspell exploded outward in waves of brilliant silver that washed over every wolf present. The effect was instantaneous and brutal. Wolves collapsed, screaming as 5 years of false memories shattered and true ones flooded back to replace them. The pain was immense. Minds weren't meant to hold two contradictory realities simultaneously. But as Moira's spell burned through Seraphine's magic, destroying it at the root, the truth finally won. Alphas remembered the real wedding, remembered Lady Vivienne as a young, nervous bride who'd won their respect with her gentleness and wisdom, remembered Seraphine arriving as a lady's companion, remembered the night everything changed, the ritual, the hooded figures, the sense that something was terribly wrong but being unable to articulate what. The memories kept coming, spreading beyond the chamber. Throughout the castle, servants remembered serving a different Luna. Guards remembered swearing oaths to Lady Vivienne. Even in the villages below, citizens who'd glimpsed the court remembered the truth of 5 years ago. Seraphine felt her carefully constructed world crumbling. The magic she'd maintained through blood and sacrifice and sheer determination was being ripped apart, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Without the illusion protecting her, she was just one wolf against dozens of enraged alphas who now remembered exactly what she'd done. No! She lunged toward Moira, dark magic crackling around her fingers. But Beckett was faster. The Alpha King shifted mid-leap, his massive black wolf form crashing into Seraphine and bearing her to the ground. His jaws closed around her throat, not to kill, not yet, but to hold her immobile while silver chains were brought to bind her. The 3 blood mages tried to flee, but found themselves surrounded by furious alphas who'd just had their minds violated. Lennox, Jasper, and Quinn attempted to slip away in the confusion, but Cornelius blocked their path with surprising speed for his age. Going somewhere? The old alpha asked mildly. I believe you 3 have quite a bit of explaining to do about your involvement in all this. By the time Moira's spell completed its work 15 minutes later, the truth was undeniable. Seraphine lay bound in silver that burned her skin, her blood mages captured, and her accomplices exposed. The Grand Council had witnessed everything. The confession, the attempted violence, and most damning of all, the restoration of memories that proved beyond doubt what she'd done. Seraphine Vale, Beckett said, having shifted back to human form and dressed in a robe someone provided. By the authority of this Grand Council and the laws that govern all shifter packs, you are charged with blood magic, murder of 23 innocents, conspiracy to commit treason, and theft of identity through forbidden means. How do you plead? Seraphine, stripped of her power and her illusions, could only glare hatred at him with venomous green eyes. She said nothing, which was answer enough. The sentence for blood magic is death, Cornelius intoned. Carried out at dawn before witnesses, as our laws demand. Not a single voice rose in protest. Seraphine had violated every sacred law, had murdered innocents, and corrupted the very fabric of their society. There would be no mercy, no appeal, no second chances. As guards dragged Seraphine toward the dungeons, she locked eyes with Vivienne one final time. You think you've won, she spat, but you'll never escape what I made you. That scared little servant will always be inside you, no matter what crown they put on your head. Vivienne met her gaze steadily. You're right about one thing. I'll never forget what you did. But that scared servant survived 5 years of your cruelty. She's stronger than you ever imagined, and she'll be here long after you're gone. Chapter 7. Justice and Blood. Dawn broke over the castle in shades of crimson and gold, the sky seeming to mirror the blood that would be spilled before the sun fully rose. Vivienne stood at the window of Beckett's chambers, now officially hers as well, watching as the execution ground was prepared in the courtyard below. A raised platform, silver chains anchored to stone, guards forming a perimeter to hold back the crowd that had already begun gathering. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Seraphine's face twisted with hatred. heard her final words about the servant who would always live inside her. Part of Vivian wanted to believe it was just spite, a last attempt to wound before death claimed her. But another part, the part that had scrubbed floors and hidden in pantries and believed herself worthless for 5 years, whispered that maybe Seraphine was right. "You're thinking too loudly," Beckett murmured, wrapping his arms around her from behind. His warmth chased away some of the chill that had settled in her bones. "I can feel your distress through the bond. Do you think she's right?" Vivian asked quietly. "That I'll never escape what she made me? That the scared servant will always be there?" "Yes," Beckett said, and when she stiffened in surprise, he turned her to face him, but not in the way she meant. That servant survived 5 years of systematic torture and abuse. She endured things that would have broken most wolves. She stayed alive through sheer determination when dying would have been easier. That strength doesn't disappear just because you're no longer wearing gray. It becomes part of who you are, part of what makes you the strongest Luna this kingdom has ever known. Vivian leaned into him, drawing strength from his certainty. Through the bond, she felt his absolute conviction in her worth, his pride in her survival, his unwavering love. It helped. Not completely. The scars Seraphine had left would take years to fully heal, if they ever did, but it helped. "The council is gathering," Beckett said after a moment. "It's time." The execution ground was crowded when they emerged, not just with the 24 alphas of the Grand Council, but with representatives from every pack in the kingdom who'd managed to reach the castle in time. Word of Seraphine's crimes had spread like wildfire through the territories, and everyone wanted to witness justice being done. Vivian walked beside Beckett, her hand in his, wearing the blue Luna gown that had been returned to her. The claiming bite on her throat was visible to all, a permanent mark of their bond. Wolves bowed as they passed, not out of obligation but genuine respect. Many had tears in their eyes, those who remembered now what had been stolen, who felt guilt for their unwitting participation in Vivian's abuse. Seraphine was brought out first, dragged between 2 guards in chains that burned her skin wherever they touched. Gone was the beautiful, composed Luna who'd ruled the castle for 5 years. In her place was a woman with wild eyes and disheveled hair, her expensive gown torn and stained. But even now, even facing certain death, her expression carried defiance. "Seraphine Vale," Beckett's voice rang out across the assembled crowd. "You have been found guilty by the Grand Council of 23 counts of murder, through blood magic, conspiracy to commit treason, identity theft through forbidden sorcery, and crimes against the very fabric of shifter society. The sentence is death by combat. As the Alpha King and the Maid you attempted to destroy, I claim the right to deliver justice personally." Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Combat execution was traditional for blood magic crimes. It gave the condemned one final chance to fight for their life, though success was virtually impossible when facing an Alpha King. "Remove her chains," Beckett commanded. The guards obeyed, stepping back quickly as the silver restraints fell away. Seraphine rubbed her burned wrists, her green eyes calculating even now. She was searching for escape, for some last-minute salvation, but found only wolves united in their condemnation. "Any final words?" Beckett asked, the question a formality required by law. Seraphine's lips curved into a bitter smile. "I regret nothing. You would all do the same for power if you had the courage. History will remember me as the Luna who ruled for 5 years, not the pretender who failed." "History," Vivian said, speaking for the first time, "will remember you as a murderer and a thief. The 23 people you killed will have a memorial built in their honor. Your name will be struck from all official records. You'll be forgotten, which is what you always feared most." The words hit their mark. Seraphine's composure cracked, fury blazing in her eyes as she shifted forms. Her wolf was smaller than most, a pale blonde creature with the same green eyes. She was fast, Vivian had to give her that, lunging at Beckett before most could even register the shift. But Beckett was faster. His own shift was instantaneous, the massive black wolf meeting Seraphine mid-leap. The combat was brutal and brief. Seraphine had never been a warrior, had relied on magic and manipulation rather than physical prowess. Against an alpha king in his prime, she stood no chance. It lasted less than 2 minutes. Beckett's jaws found her throat and crushed, ending 5 years of lies and murder in one decisive motion. When Seraphine's body went limp, a collective sigh seemed to pass through the crowd. Relief, justice, closure. Beckett shifted back to human form, accepting the robe someone handed him. His expression was grim, but satisfied. Let it be known that blood magic will not be tolerated in this kingdom. Those who practice it will face the same fate, no matter their station or power. The 3 blood mages were brought out next, still hooded, but now bound and gagged. They'd tried to speak curses even in captivity, requiring the gags to prevent potential harm. Their executions were carried out by Valor and 2 senior guards, swift and efficient. No words were spoken. Blood mages deserved no ceremony, no respect in death. Finally, Lennox, Jasper, and Quinn were dragged forward. The 3 alphas who'd known about Seraphine's crimes and helped cover them. Lennox, who'd provided victims for the sacrifices. Jasper, who'd hidden the blood mages in his territory. Quinn, who'd given false alibis during crucial investigations. You 3, Beckett said, his voice carrying judgment, betrayed every oath you swore as alphas. You enabled murder. You conspired in blood magic. You valued political advantage over the lives of innocents. By unanimous vote of the Grand Council, you are stripped of your titles and sentenced to death. Unlike Seraphine, these 3 were given no chance for combat. They'd forfeited that honor through their cowardice. They were executed by beheading, traditional punishment for alphas who betrayed their oaths. Their bodies would be burned, their names erased from their pack histories, their territories given to betas who'd remained loyal. As the final execution was carried out and silence fell over the courtyard, Vivian felt something shift inside her. The scared servant Seraphine had mentioned was still there, would always be part of her. But so was the woman who'd survived impossible odds, the mate who'd fought for her bond, the Luna who'd helped expose terrible crimes. She was all of these things, not just one, and that made her stronger than Seraphine could have ever imagined. The crowd began to disperse slowly, wolves returning to their territories to spread word of what had transpired. But many lingered, approaching Vivienne and Beckett to offer condolences for what had been stolen, congratulations for justice served, pledges of loyalty to the true Luna. Helena was among them, tears streaming down her weathered face as she embraced Vivienne. My lady, I'm so sorry. I should have fought harder against the magic. Should have remembered. You kept what you could, Vivienne said gently. That's more than most managed. And you showed me kindness when no one else dared. That matters more than you know. Cornelius approached next, moving slowly but with dignity. The Grand Council wishes to hold a formal restoration ceremony tomorrow evening, to officially recognize you as Luna before all the kingdom. Will you accept? Vivienne looked at Beckett, who squeezed her hand encouragingly. Through the bond, she felt his support, his absolute certainty that she was ready for this. I will, she said firmly. As the old alpha walked away satisfied, Valor appeared with news. We've begun investigating Seraphine's finances. She was funding her blood magic through embezzled funds from the royal treasury. We're talking about significant amounts over 5 years. Additionally, we've found evidence of other crimes, blackmail, extortion, at least 2 more murders that we initially attributed to natural causes. How deep does this go? Beckett asked grimly. Deep. We'll be untangling her web for months. Valor paused, then added more quietly. We've also located records of the ritual she used. Detailed descriptions of each sacrifice, including their names. We can finally give proper burials to those who were taken. See to it personally, Beckett commanded. And Valor? Have the royal scribes begin compiling a complete account of everything that happened. Every detail, no matter how painful. This can never be allowed to happen again, which means future generations need to understand exactly how it was done and how it was stopped. Yes, Alpha King. As Valor departed to his duties, Beckett guided Vivienne away from the courtyard toward the castle gardens. They needed space, needed air, needed to process everything that had happened in the past week. It's really over, Vivienne said, though part of her couldn't quite believe it. Seraphine is dead. The magic is broken. Everyone remembers the truth. The immediate crisis is over, Beckett corrected gently, but rebuilding will take time. Trust was violated, both yours personally and the kingdom's collectively. Treaties signed under false pretenses need to be renegotiated. Families of the murdered deserve restitution. And you, he cupped her face tenderly, you deserve time to heal from what you endured. I don't know how to be a Luna, Vivian admitted. 5 years ago, I had 3 months of practice before it was all stolen. Now I'm supposed to just step back into that role? Like nothing happened? Not like nothing happened, Beckett said firmly. Your experiences, as terrible as they were, give you perspective that most Lunas never have. You understand both privilege and powerlessness. You know what it's like to be invisible, to be vulnerable, to need help and have no one offer it. That empathy will make you an exceptional Luna. But only if you're willing to forgive yourself for surviving. Vivian felt tears sting her eyes. I don't know how to do that either. Then we'll figure it out together. Beckett pulled her close, and through the mate bond, she felt his absolute commitment to her healing. One day at a time. One step at a time. For however long it takes. They stood in the garden as the sun climbed higher, burning away the shadows of a night that had lasted 5 years. Somewhere in the castle, servants were already removing traces of Seraphine's occupation. Her belongings packed away, her portraits taken down, her name being systematically erased from official records. Tomorrow there would be a restoration ceremony. Next week, memorial services for the murdered. Next month, political negotiations and treaty renewals. The work of rebuilding would be constant and exhausting. But today, in this moment, Vivian allowed herself to simply breathe, to stand in sunlight with her mate beside her and know that she was free. Truly, finally free. The servant who'd hidden in pantries and stolen scraps would always be part of her. But so would the lady who'd walked into the Grand Council wearing her Luna gown and demanded justice. Both were real. Both were her. And together, they would forge something stronger than either could have been alone. Chapter 8. New Beginnings. 3 months after Seraphine's execution, Vivian stood before a floor-length mirror in chambers that had finally begun to feel like home. The woman staring back at her was someone she was still learning to recognize. Not the broken servant, not the naive bride from 5 years ago, but something new forged from both experiences. You're frowning, Helena said gently, adjusting the intricate braids woven through Vivian's hair. Second thoughts about the reforms? Not second thoughts, just. Vivian touched her stomach, where new life was beginning to make itself known, wondering if I'm doing this right. The reforms had been her idea, implemented with Beckett's full support. Every servant in the castle now had guaranteed rights, adequate food, rest periods, the ability to appeal mistreatment directly to the Luna without fear of retribution. She'd created a system where the invisible could be seen, where the powerless had protection. Some nobles grumbled about the changes, but Beckett silenced objections with swift efficiency. You're doing more than right, Helena assured her. You're changing lives. That young Omega who came to you last week about her alpha's abuse? You saved her. The servants who can now sleep in warm quarters instead of drafty corners? You gave them dignity. That matters more than you know. A wave of nausea rolled through Vivian, and she gripped the edge of the vanity. The morning sickness had started 2 weeks ago, confirming what she'd already suspected through the mate bond. Beckett had been insufferably protective ever since, to the point where she'd had to remind him she was pregnant, not made of glass. The memorial dedication is in an hour, Helena said. Are you sure you're up for it? Vivian straightened, pushing through the discomfort. I have to be. Those 23 people deserve to be remembered by someone who understands what they suffered. The memorial stood in the castle's main courtyard, a massive stone monument carved with the names of every person Seraphine had sacrificed. Vivian had insisted on including their full names, their ages, their pack affiliations, everything that made them real people rather than anonymous victims. When she and Beckett unveiled the monument before the assembled crowd, a hush fell. The weight of 23 stolen lives, of 5 years of systematic murder, of justice too long delayed. It all crystallized in that moment of silence. We remember, Vivian said, her voice carrying across the courtyard. Not just their deaths, but their lives. They were travelers seeking new opportunities, servants caring for their families, pack members visiting friends. Each had dreams, hopes, people who loved them. Seraphine tried to reduce them to fuel for her ambitions, but we will not let her succeed. They will be remembered. Always. Beckett's hand found hers, and through the bond, she felt his pride, his love, his certainty that she was exactly the Luna their kingdom needed. The crowd echoed her words. We remember. In the weeks that followed, Vivian threw herself into reconstruction. The territories that had belonged to Lennox, Jasper, and Quinn were reorganized under new leadership. Betas who'd proven their loyalty and competence during the crisis. Treaties signed under false pretenses were renegotiated with honesty about what had occurred. Some alliances were strengthened through the truth. Others had to be carefully rebuilt. Through it all, Vivian felt her wolf healing. The damage from 5 years of suppression was slowly reversing, aided by Beckett's patient guidance and her own determination. She could shift now, though it remained difficult. Her wolf was smaller than it should be, weaker, but it was hers. And each shift came a little easier than the last. The pregnancy announced itself more forcefully as time passed. By the 4th month, Vivian could no longer hide the changes in her scent, the slight rounding of her belly. Beckett's protectiveness reached new heights, insisting she rest more, eat more, avoid stress. She loved him for his concern even as it occasionally drove her to distraction. You're hovering, she told him one evening, as he fussed over pillows for the 3rd time. I'm ensuring your comfort, he replied with dignity that didn't quite hide his sheepish expression. I'm pregnant, not dying. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. Yes, but you're not just any woman. You're my mate, my Luna, the mother of my children. His hand settled on her stomach. Reverent, after everything you've survived, I refuse to take any chances with your well-being. The tenderness in his voice melted her irritation. Through the bond, she felt his deep-seated fear that somehow, something would go wrong, that after finally having her back, fate would find new ways to separate them. We're safe, she promised, covering his hand with hers. All 3 of us. The months passed in a blur of governance and growing life. Vivian's stomach swelled with twins, a revelation that had sent Beckett into another spiral of protectiveness. Helena moved into chambers near theirs to assist with the pregnancy, her experience invaluable as Vivian navigated the physical challenges. On a stormy night in late spring, labor began. The birthing chamber filled with midwives and healers, but it was Beckett's presence that anchored Vivian through the pain. He held her hand, whispered encouragement, shared her agony through the mate bond, in a way that made her both grateful for and exhausted by their connection. When the first cry split the air, followed quickly by a second, Vivian felt something fundamental shift inside her. The twins were healthy, a boy and a girl, both with their father's dark hair and golden eyes, both strong and perfect. They're beautiful, Beckett breathed, holding both infants with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his warrior's frame. Like their mother. Vivian looked at her children, at her mate, at Helena crying happy tears in the corner. She thought about the servant who'd hidden in pantries, the lady who'd lost everything, the Luna who'd fought to reclaim her life. All of them were part of her story. All of them had led to this moment. What will we name them? Beckett asked. Willem, Vivian said softly, naming the boy after her father. And Catherine, for my mother. So they're never forgotten. The babies were presented to the assembled packs 2 days later, introduced as the legitimate heirs of the Alpha King and his Luna. The joy that swept through the kingdom was palpable. Hope for the future. Proof that life continued. That goodness could emerge from darkness. Standing on the balcony with her family, Vivian looked out over the kingdom she would help rule. The scars of the past 5 years would never fully disappear. She still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at unexpected touches, still carried the weight of everything she'd endured. But she also had this, a mate who loved her unconditionally, children who represented new beginnings. a kingdom she was helping to reshape into something better. The servant who'd believed herself worthless had become a Luna who understood both privilege and powerlessness, who could govern with wisdom born from surviving the impossible. "What are you thinking?" Beckett murmured, his arm around her waist as their children slept peacefully in the cradles beside them. "That we survived," Vivian said simply. "And that matters." It did matter. Every day of survival, every moment of healing, every life touched by the reform she'd implemented. It all mattered. The darkness hadn't won. Love had. Truth had. And in the end, that would always be worth fighting for.